Hello and welcome to another Tattered Cover virtual event. My name is Adam. I am the Director of Events for Tattered Cover. And tonight we have two amazing writers who will be in conversation and reading from their books. But first, I just want to give you some heads up about some housekeeping. If you need closed captioning, there is a black bar at the bottom of your YouTube screen that says CC. You can click that and that'll be your closed captioning for the evening if you want it or need it. I will be putting links in the chat for us where you can get both writers' books, and we'll be talking about that throughout the night. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will get to them at the end of the event. If you're interested in more events, please go to tatteredcover.com/events, and you can find all of our upcoming events like what we're doing tonight. And it's because of people like you that we've been able to be open for 50 years. And that's amazing. So thank you for supporting an independent bookstore, even if you're not in Denver where we are located. Thank you for coming on to this virtual event. Tonight, I am so excited to have the author of The Diet-Free Revolution, 10 Steps to Free Yourself from the Diet Cycle with Mindful Eating and Radical Self-Acceptance. Alexis Conason, is a clinical psychologist and eating disorder specialist in a private practice in New York City. She's the author of The Diet-Free Revolution. She was previously a research associate with the New York Nutrition Obesity Research Center in affiliation with Columbia University. Her research has been published in peer-reviewed journals. She is a frequent speaker at conferences, and she has been featured widely as an expert on topics of mindful eating, body image, and diet culture and media. In conversation with Dr. Conason is Alison Gerber. She is an author of the critically acclaimed Own Voices novels, Braced and Focused, as well as Taking Up Space, which came out this May. She is a graduate of the New School's MFA in Writing for Children and lives in Brooklyn, New York with her husband and daughter. Please give a virtual round of applause for Dr. Alexis Conason and Alison Gerber, who will now unmute themselves and take over, and I will hop off.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Have a great event. I'll be back with audience questions at the end.
Thank you. Great. So I'm so grateful for Tattered Cover for having us here. And thank you, Alison, for leading us in conversation. I'm just super excited to be talking with you.
I cannot wait to celebrate your amazing, amazing, amazing book. Why don't I just start off by sharing a little snippet about Taking Up Space, and then I'm going to turn everything over to you and have you read a little bit from The Diet-Free Revolution if you feel comfortable doing that. Okay. So for those of you who are joining us and aren't familiar with my books, I write for kids 8 years old and up and the adults who love them. My new book is Taking Up Space. It's about a seventh grade basketball player who is struggling to feel good about her body and herself. And it's based on my experience struggling with food and self-worth, body image, and disordered eating. So that sort of frames our conversation a little bit in terms of how we're talking about the diet-free revolution, so that viewers who are coming to this who aren't familiar now know that I have a personal connection to this topic, and I feel very passionately about it. And I am so excited. I just loved this book. I think The Diet-Free Revolution is an amazing, amazing, eye-opening resource that is really important and could really start incredibly important conversations among adults about how to move forward in this diet culture. So I'm really excited to hear your book and to talk to you about it.
Thank you. And I have to say, I think I love that we're doing this event together, because I think there's something really unique about how to address this with kids and also for adults, and that your book is kind of looking at things through a fictional lens for young adults. And I think that's so important. So, all right. So I'll read a little bit. This is just from the introduction of my book, the first few pages. And we'll take it from there. Okay. If you're like most people, you've spent a lot of your life thinking about what to eat and what not to eat, and feeling like crap about your body. You've done what any rational person would do. You tried to change your body by dieting. Again and again and yet again. Each time you started a new diet, you were filled with hope and yearning. Finally, I'm going to get the life I've always wanted. More energy, better health, respect, sex appeal. But it was only a matter of time before you fell off the wagon, and that optimism was replaced by shame and self-blame. How could I have failed at this again? You berated yourself as you ate a pint of ice cream, standing in the kitchen with the freezer still open. Or perhaps it was the tsunami of guilt after ordering the pasta with cream sauce, when you had promised yourself you would be good and get the chicken breast. Each time you strayed from the prescribed methods of another plan, you vowed to be better, to get back on track, and you once again doubled down on the dieting game. I get it. I've been there too. I spent most of my life on and off diet plans. I went on my first juice cleanse when I was 8 years old. I found the instructions in one of the countless diet books that lined the bookshelves of my family's living room. My mother was a chronic dieter, and I learned early on that dieting and overeating was the way of life. Big appetites were our family hallmark, and dieting was how we combated it. When we went out to eat, the menu was always a focal point of discussion. If I were going to cheat today, I would certainly get the pasta with seafood, my mother would say salaciously. Or maybe the ribs, my father would suggest before both would order the grilled fish, politely asking the waiter if it would be possible to substitute the roasted potatoes that came on the side for some steamed spinach and go light on the oil, please. While my mother rarely commented on my body directly, the scorn for her own body spoke louder than words. Bodies were objects to be wrestled into submission. Food was a substance to exert control over, or to surrender yourself to. As a child, I discovered that eating helped me cope with my internal struggles. Food was my companion, a source of comfort and pleasure in bleak moments. But as adolescence brought unwanted curves and unsolicited attention, food also became the enemy. My body took the blame for my unhappiness, and I was convinced that if I could just get my body to conform, I could finally have the love and acceptance I craved. I found myself caught in a vicious cycle. The more I dieted, the more out of control I felt around food. The more I ate, the more I hated my body. And the more I despised my body, the more convinced I became that dieting was the answer. For nearly 2 decades, around and around I went. Even though I was failing at dieting, or more accurately, dieting was failing me, I was committed to the weight loss paradigm. It was such an ingrained part of my life that I never questioned it. After all, it wasn't just me who was dieting. Everyone around me was doing it too. My friend would call me in a panic after having eaten a sandwich, desperately asking for reassurance that 2 pieces of bread wouldn't make her gain weight. When we went out to dinner, salads, dressing on the side, please, were the norm. Stopping for ice cream clearly meant fat-free froyo. One of my friends used the phrase, "she looked so anorexic," as a compliment. For the record, anorexia is a serious mental illness. At the time, the only thing that seemed abnormal in all of this was my craving for French fries and chow fun noodles. After college, I decided to pursue a career in psychology with the intention of helping others lose weight. Because when you can't figure out your own stuff, of course you'll be a pro at figuring out everyone else's. I spent 5 years in graduate school learning psychological strategies to help people eat less and exercise more. I did postdoctoral work in obesity research, trained at a bariatric weight loss surgery clinic, and eventually hung up my shingle proclaiming that I was open for business as a psychologist specializing in weight management. And that's when reality smacked me in the face. The strategies I learned in school didn't work. Just like dieting didn't work for me, it didn't work for my clients. In fact, the harder my clients tried to control their eating, the more out of control they spiraled. They were stuck in the same cycle I was in, and it wasn't just us. At obesity research conferences, I heard study after study presented with dismal results detailing the different ways people failed to lose weight and keep it off long term. It was clear that experts had no idea how to help people lose significant weight in a sustainable way. In a panic about the bleak outlook of my newly minted career, I began to search for something different. I discovered mindful eating and learned about weight-inclusive approaches to health. I embrace the radical notions that my value is not determined by my body size or my health, and that I deserved a life full of respect, love, and pleasure, regardless of what size pants I was wearing. Bodies naturally exist across a diverse spectrum of shapes and sizes, and this is a fact to admire, not admonish. My eating started to feel more in control once I stopped trying so frantically to control it. But more importantly, I stopped thinking about food all the time, and the deep shame I had carried since childhood started to ease. And this is what I want to share with you, that it is possible to feel better about your eating and your body, but not in the ways that most of us have been taught.
So beautiful. And I got chills when you spoke about the medical conferences. I think in particular, it really hits the reader. And I think this is one of the things about this book. It's so much of it I knew from my own research and taking up space, but hearing the way that you present it, it's like I heard it again for the first time, because we're so used to living in a diet culture. And I'll ask you to define what that is for our audience in a minute. But we're so used to hearing how we're the problem. And if we just try a little harder, when really diets are the problem and diets don't work. And that fact is so well presented in this book in a way that it's really hard to ignore. And it makes you sort of look at the world that we're living in with eyes wide open. It's really powerful. Yeah. So I actually want to ask you to define diet culture for us, for those of you who have never heard that term before. And I'm also curious if you could share, if you could change two things about the medical system, since that's sort of like our first entryway into this conversation. What would those two things be? What's problematic to you?
So I'll start with the definition of diet culture, just so we're kind of all starting at the same framework. Diet culture, as I see it, is kind of the entire, it's the entire system that is invested in making us believe that our value, that our health, that our worth is directly tied to the numbers on the scale, that healthy means thinner, that fat is bad, and that we should just be investing all of our time, money, emotional resources into trying to shrink our bodies. And it's something that is really hard to see because it's an ingrained part of our culture. And one of the things that I really, hope I highlighted in that passage was that it was literally, I never thought to question what I was doing. When I was dieting for almost 20 years of my life, it never even occurred to me that the problem could be the dieting itself versus clearly, I thought there was just something wrong with me. I wasn't doing it right. This is something that everyone else has figured out. And when someone even asked the question of me, like, or introduced the idea that dieting doesn't work, it was just mind blowing, because it was, it's like you do something for so long and you don't question it. And then all of a sudden, a simple question shifts your whole perspective. And really, it changed everything in my life when I started to see things differently.
I feel the same way. And I think that's amazing. It's also how the information is presented to us. And so if you grow up in a house where dieting is the norm, where hating your body is the norm, which is very common. I mean, you quote some of the statistics in your book and they're a little bit outrageous, to think about how many people are impacted by the harmful effects of dieting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 90%. Some research shows that as high as 90% of women are unhappy with their bodies. So, that's most of us. And, and a lot of us are parents. And then that gets filtered down to the next generation as well.
And you really highlighted the shame of that. You really highlighted the shame of that and what that, how that impacts you in the passage that you read. Yeah. So I'm curious, what are the two things that you would change about the medical system? If you had a magic wand.
Yeah. So the two things I would change, I think about it very much in terms of like top-down solutions and bottom-up. Top-down, I think it's really important that we get the industry money outside, away from medical research, because when I was, one thing that I learned from my time working in obesity research, and also kind of learned more about as I was doing just the background research for my book, was how entrenched the weight loss industry is in the medical field. So a lot of the recommendations that we think are coming from medical associations that have the best interest of, just the average person in mind are really strongly influenced by lobbying efforts on behalf of the weight loss industry, the pharmaceutical industry. And that's what's impacting the guidelines and recommendations. And it's really like what's benefiting these corporations more so than what's benefiting the average person. And I think it's very confusing because it's not clear, where those conflicts are. So we just think that, the American Medical Association is saying that there's this new guideline, and we don't, realize that new guideline, that the 10 people who were convened to create that new guideline are all on the payroll of pharmaceutical industries and weight loss industries. So that's one thing I feel really strongly about, is I think we have to separate out the money and, have the recommendations really be about our health, not benefiting these corporations. And
Absolutely.
yeah. And then the second thing, I'd say bottom up is that I think we need to be educating medical professionals in the early stages, like in medical school, in residency, internship programs, about weight inclusive approaches to health, because the research is there. The research really the science doesn't support weight normative approaches. Telling people just to lose weight is not a helpful intervention. And as I talk about in my book, weight stigma in the medical industry is really pervasive, and that has a profound impact on people's health. And I know that doctors, most doctors, I would say almost all doctors, go into the field wanting to help people. And they're learning from a system that itself is very much infused in diet culture, that, this is the best way to help people. And it's actually not the best way to help people. So, I would love to see us get some like weight inclusive education and education about the harms of weight stigma into these early levels of training.
So how did you go from working in an obesity clinic and, working in bariatric surgery to becoming a health at every size therapist? Like, how did that transformation happen? And for those of you who aren't familiar, Health at Every Size is an organization that does certification in the type of health care that we've been talking about, really treating everybody where they are.
Yeah. So the Health at Every Size, it's actually a movement. It's like a philosophy it's a social justice movement that's dedicated to increasing access to care for all people at all body sizes, and trying to separate out weight from health, because we know, and again, the research really strongly supports that our weight doesn't determine our health the way that we've been taught, like the way that the evening news stories portray, or the average, person believes. And, I think that when we can look at what actually impacts health, that's very helpful to people, rather than keeping them on the same hamster wheel of like, your body is bad, you need to change it, you need to lose weight, which is a very harmful message. Yeah. So in terms of my own journey, as I was saying, like, I spent so much of my life just immersed in diet culture, not questioning anything, was set off on this career path for weight management. And I'm so grateful that I happened to be at a training, a mindful eating training that was a completely weight loss like centered mindful eating training. So I didn't go there with the intention of changing my whole life. I thought I was going to go and learn how to use mindful eating and help people lose weight and continue on that path. But when I was there, I happened to meet some people who were involved in the Health at Every Size movement. And it was that simple question. I remember sitting at lunch one day, and one of the people who was at the retreat with me just said something along the lines of like, but we know dieting doesn't work. And I was like, what? Like, what do you mean dieting doesn't work? Of course dieting works. And I think she might have said something like, well, does dieting work for you? And I was like, no, it doesn't work for me, but like, that's because I'm bad. That's because like, I can't stick to it. I can't do it. And even though I didn't take it in at the time, it rattled around that idea that maybe dieting isn't the answer, and maybe weight loss isn't what we need to be pushing on people. And I started to look into it more and read research, and, and the science was very convincing. And the science, simultaneously, I was working in my career in attending all of these obesity research conferences, and the science there was not very convincing. It was really incredible to see these top experts with so much money and government funding for their research studies. And the results over and over again showed that people don't lose weight and sustain it long term. So thankfully I found that, and I, made this pivot, and I've spent probably the last, 10 years or so of my career immersed in this philosophy. And it's been life-changing for me. And I think it's been life-changing in terms of the work that I've been doing with my clients as well.
It's incredible and so inspiring. It sort of leaves me with the question, so if diets don't work, then what? Then what do we do? If like this whole thing we've been fed our whole lives is wrong, then what do we do? Then what happens?
Here's the amazing thing is that we already know what to do. We are born with this inherent wisdom of our body. Like, our body is so well equipped to guide us in terms of what to eat, when to eat. We have, this kind of hardwired, I call it our internal GPS system, this hardwired navigation system that kind of says like, okay, I'm hungry, or I'm not hungry anymore, or that food tastes good to me. And it's so simple, and it's also so radical, because many of us from like as young as we remember have spent our lives disconnecting from what our body is telling us and believing that information is to be fought against. That information is bad. I'm hungry, but I shouldn't eat too much. It was amazing. I saw a product that was recently in a store that was targeted towards toddlers, or even, infants/toddlers. That was a portion control meal set in the shape of a train. And it was, the messaging on the box said something about, teach your children to eat enough, but not too much. And that's exactly the messaging that we get, from babies. Clean your plate, one more bite, finish your broccoli before you have your dessert. But don't eat too much, and it's really that kind of conflicting messaging makes it so hard to trust our body. And when we've been hearing that since infancy, practically, it's a lot of work to get back to like what we knew then. But the good thing is that our bodies are pretty amazing, and that guidance system never shuts off. Even though we haven't been listening to it, it's still there.
That is really helpful to know. I think that might be reassuring to some people who are like thinking for the first time, wait, diets don't work. I'm doing that my whole life. I don't even know where to start. And thinking, well, the great place to start is to pick up the Diet Free Revolution, and also to accept that you can start at any point. You don't have, it's okay if you feel like you messed up and you failed at this part of it. Like, your navigation system is still there waiting for you when you're ready to listen to it.
Exactly. And in the book, I do kind of spell out like these 10 steps of how to start listening to your body again, because I think a lot of the time when people are starting to move away from dieting, it can feel overwhelming, because dieting in many ways provides this kind of structure and security of, I just have to do X, Y, and Z, and then I'm going to get this life that I've always wanted. So when you realize that's all a sham, it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do? What do I do now? And listening to your body can feel vague, and what does that really mean? And I can't hear my body, and how do I do that? So I thought it was important to provide a structure, that people can use to bring them from that point of, contemplating leaving behind diet culture to learning how to hear what your body's telling us, how to honor that, and how to bring in compassion for yourself again.
It's really important. I was thinking when you were talking about the toddler train, about how, well, so many things. I was thinking so many things. I have a 3.5-year-old, and I think constantly about like, how am I presenting food? How is the world presenting food to her? And what can I do to prevent the world? How can I protect her from diet culture? Mm-hmm. And it's really hard, even from a young age. I think I sort of have two questions here. My biggest concern in that is the connection between diet and self-worth. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, like, how do the two things connect, and why is it so harmful? I think that's, we've been saying like diets don't work, diets are bad, but like, why are they bad? Why don't they work? What makes diet culture so bad for us?
Well, one of the things that I think is most harmful about dieting is that it's premised on the idea that our bodies are not good enough, that we have to change our bodies in order to be healthy, to be valuable, to be, deserving of respect, from ourselves and from others. And that's a really harmful message. Like, I also am a mom of two little girls, and I want them, I want to do everything in my power for them to feel confident in their body, not in terms of what their body looks like, but to develop a deep fundamental trust in their body, and to know, their body is good and their body can be trusted and can be used to guide them. So when we're given the message that our body is not good, that can instill a deep sense of shame. We know that shame is a very, I'll use the word toxic emotion, in terms of it can be very pervasive, and shame makes us want to withdraw from the world. It makes us want to hide. And when, if we look at this from the perspective of 90% of women don't feel good about their body, and often that comes along with shame, we have a large amount of women, and a large amount of men too. I think it's like about 40% of men who don't feel good about their body, who are essentially like opting out of fully engaging in the world because we feel, we're preoccupied with like not feeling good about our body. So I think that it's really harmful, like on an individual level. I think diet culture is also really harmful on a social level, because we need women out there sharing our voices and taking up space.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, that's why the name of the book is Taking Up Space, because when food takes up all the space in your mind, you don't have room for all the other amazing thoughts you could possibly have. Mm-hmm. And when you feel like you're taking up too much space in the room, when really you're entitled to take up however much space you want, in terms of your voice, in terms of your body, in terms of every part of you, mm-hmm. You shrink yourself and you make yourself smaller in all the different ways, and that really can hurt our society in a big way, and it can hurt you if you're doing that to yourself. So if you are a parent right now, I'm just thinking, of people who might be listening. If you're a parent and you have a broken relationship with food, your relationship with food is complicated, it's painful, it's been impacted by diet culture, how can you parent the next generation and sort of encourage a positive relationship with body and food? Where might somebody who feels broken start?
Yeah. So I think that, one thing, the first, maybe the most important thing to recognize, is that kids are resilient. So regardless of what's going on, I think there's always time to repair and heal, both for ourselves and for our children. And we see in research that one of the most impactful things that we can do in terms of our children's relationship with food and body image is to heal our own relationship with food and body image, because kids see that. I know I wrote about in the passage that I read, like my mother wasn't so critical of my own body, but I saw how intensely critical she was about her body and all the ways that she tried to hide. And I got that message that, bodies, unless bodies look in this idealized way, they're not acceptable to be out in the world. So, I think that it's so important that as parents, we do that work on ourselves to start to heal. And we don't have to get it perfect. It's not about getting it right all the time. But I think that when we can start to shift our framework to having, being more aware of the things that we're saying to ourselves, certainly more aware of the things that we're saying about ourselves in front of our kids, that starts to make an impact. And talking to our kids about this, there's so many, I loved your book as an adult. My kids aren't at the age for your book yet, but like as an adult, I loved your book. I thought it was great. And I think that using the lens of books like yours, and I know we have some in our home that are for my kids are 2 and 6. We have some body positive kinds of books for that age range. But also questioning things about, if your kid says, they don't feel good about their body, rather than supporting them and in terms of saying, I'll help you lose weight, or, we can go to Weight Watchers together, which is often the response that parents make. to be able to take a moment and shift and talk about, the fact that they don't feel good about their body. And that is likely a result of the messages they've been getting from our culture. And, I say this in the book, and I can say this again and again, that the problem is not their bodies. The problem is not our bodies. The problem is diet culture, and to educate them about diet culture we can't protect our children from ever being exposed to diet culture because it is very much just in the air that we breathe, but we can teach them to be resilient to diet culture and to fight against it. And I think that's a powerful thing.
And I think even with young children, naming things really helps. I know that my 3.5-year-old came home from school and said, that's junk food. She was talking about a specific kind of food. And I said, well, there's no such thing as junk food unless it's coming from the garbage. If we don't want to eat food from the garbage, that's actually not good for us. That is actually dirty. But other than that, all food is good food. And I think you can sort of start that conversation from as soon as they're bringing home diet culture, and as soon as they're starting to ask questions. I think you can start to name it and say, let's talk about it. Let's talk about where you got that from, why you think that that's right, and sort of rework it for them and reframe things. One of my main goals in writing Taking Up Space, which is a book about a girl who's really struggling with this exact thing, is that I wanted parents who were the 90% of people coming into this feeling ashamed of their own relationship with food to have a way to talk to their kids about, to sort of open up a dialogue, even if they don't feel like they have all the tools. And what I always say is, like, a lot of the tools are in Taking Up Space, even for the adults, to have that conversation. And I think the diet-free revolution, what I think is so great about it is it's sort of like it's like the adult resource to be reading on the side while you're reading Taking Up Space with your kid. That it's a handbook for how to start to heal yourself. And I think healing comes in all different forms. I've shared very openly that my disordered eating relapsed when I was pregnant with my daughter. It was an incredibly shocking and painful experience, but it really forced me to face all of the feelings that I had and sort of say, I need to heal this now. This is urgent. And that process wasn't, it didn't happen all at once. There are some days where healing is still hard, and I'm still healing, and there's still hurt. And so even for me, reading your book really helped me sort of reinforce some of the things that I already knew and I wanted to know deeper, and especially with the medical community stuff, because so many doctors are unaware of what the system looks like. And so they turn to the research, and that can make things very complicated. We sort of also have to name things for ourselves, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, very much. And I agree completely with what you're saying in terms of sometimes people, kind of mistakenly feel that they will reach some magical place in the future where this is all resolved and I don't think about food anymore, and body image, I always feel great about my body. And that's not really what this is about. I think that it's about building resiliency to deal with a dysfunctional culture and starting to recognize that we are not the problem, and to treat ourselves with more compassion. People often, when we say love your body, people often think that means love what your body looks like. And I think that that's not what this is about. This is about loving your body kind of with a fierce, unconditional love, like how you might love a child or a pet or something like that. And learning that your body is good, even if you don't always like what your body looks like. There's always going to be days. I have days where I don't feel great about the way that my body looks, but I try to recognize that is a product of diet culture, that I'm having those thoughts, and those thoughts don't have to be in the driver's seat. We can recognize those thoughts, allow them, and move on with our lives, and still get up to the stage, so to speak, and do the things we need to do and take up space and be heard. We don't have to hide just because we don't love the way that our body looks some days.
Absolutely. I also think that voice, that diet culture voice, gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's almost not there. And then it might pop up a little bit, and you gotta, you have to take the second to recognize that it's there. But I do think that with time, it does get smaller and less important. And you sort of start to remember that that voice, that part of you that doesn't like the way that you feel in your body in this moment was the way that you felt all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that the work is sort of is to take care of yourself and have empathy for yourself and what we go through as human beings, especially right now in this this pandemic environment where we are really being asked to be resilient and in every single possible way. It's really impacting all the parts of our lives. So it's a good time to be thinking about how are we taking care of ourselves, like emotionally, and showing ourselves compassion. I think that we are about at the point where it's time to take some audience questions.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you both so much for that. I think it's a super important conversation, and your books obviously deal with it in different ways. We do have a question, a few. One from Ty. This was about how do you raise your children to feel comfortable for them to have their or to raise their awareness if they are uncomfortable about their body, to speak up about it. Yeah, could you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah.
No, Alexis, why don't you go first, and I'll piggyback off of you.
Yeah. So I hope I'm understanding the question correctly, but how to speak up to like a parent or
Yes.
a caregiver.
Right.
Okay. I think that sometimes it's on us to open up the conversation and I think that, again, books is such a great way. A lot of the times, and this is true with my daughter, with my older one, certainly, who sometimes has a hard time talking directly about feelings, but we can talk through books, through movies, and it can kind of diffuse things a little bit to put it on, this third person, so to speak. So, a lot of the times we open up the conversations, or as a parent, I open up conversations in terms of even just like noticing things on, movies that we're watching, like, there's very little body diversity in kid shows these days. Certainly the shows that my daughter gravitates to, which are the more mainstream shows, are, they're cartoons, but they are, very much promoting this unrealistic thin ideal. And sometimes I just remark like, their bodies don't look like most people's bodies, or where's the people in different size bodies? Because that's what real life is. And that's, some of the beauty in real life. So, that's just one example, but like different ways to open it up, and maybe it can bring the conversation to, kind of pave the way for a more direct conversation about your child's body.
I completely agree. I think sort of this idea of bibliotherapy, like reading, first of all, I always think if your kid is having a hard time opening up about anything, that books are a great way in.
Mm-hmm.
Like read the book with them that they want to read.
Mm-hmm.
Suggest books that you think might spark a conversation, and read with them. Like read the same book, read a couple of chapters together. Or if that was my thing, so I liked to do that, but not everybody likes to do that. Read alongside them. The library usually has multiple copies of books. And wonderful, amazing local bookstores also carry multiple copies, which they would love to sell to you. One of the things about taking up space, and I'll just like plug my book for a second, is that it's about basketball. It's a book about a girl who's a basketball player, and her body changes and she responds to that. And so if you go into it reading a book with your kid about basketball, and then she enters a YouTube cooking competition, then you can talk around the issue that might be sort of bothering them. And you'll find that in talking about fiction, you usually sort of hit on reality, and there's an opportunity for kids to ask questions without directly asking questions. And that can sometimes feel more comfortable. At least that's how it was in my house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's really important, just a reminder to frame these conversations, to try to follow your kid's lead on this. And if we are going to be talking about bodies, to try to frame it in terms of like not feeling good about your body, or the cultural ideas around body, versus ever, kind of colluding with the idea that like, their body or their weight is a problem in any way.
And there's a question from Alan about like Instagram and TikTok culture, and how that's like just shifting like expectations about body image. And the question is, do you see positive trends on social media? Are there outlets like for teens who might want to read a book, by a doctor about diet culture? Are there outlets you feel teens can access?
So I think Alison's book is a great one. And in terms of, there's also Intuitive Eating, which is one of the kind of foundational books in the anti-diet movement, has recently come out with a book for teens. So I would recommend that as a resource as well. That's a nonfiction resource. So there are some health at every size, weight inclusive books out there specifically for teens. And in terms of like social media culture, I think that it's such an interesting question because I see both sides of it. I think that on one hand, we're kind of looking to people as experts who might be promoting pretty disordered beliefs around food and body image. And we're seeing this idealization of, influencers that can be, again, promoting some pretty problematic messages. But we also are seeing, a lot of people, more body, depending on who you follow, social media is all about what's on your feed. So we can also curate our feed to include like a lot of body diversity. There's a lot of activity in like the fat acceptance movement, in the health at every size movement, and the body liberation movements, to follow both, experts and doctors and things like that, but also people with lived experience, which are, the most important people to learn from in terms of just educating about what the experience is like living in our culture in different kinds of bodies and celebrating different body shapes and sizes. It's so important.
And I think Aubrey Gordon is somebody to look to, and also Virginia Soleil-Smith, who is the person who connected us. They're both great resources for this kind of dialogue and really talking about drawing attention to lived experience.
Exactly. And Virginia actually does a lot of work also with for like kids and with eating stuff. So I would definitely direct people there as well.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. We're about out of time. You can purchase, everyone out there in the virtual world, I put links for Alexis's and Alison's books. I think this was a very important conversation. I'm glad that you agreed to do this with Tattered cover, especially. Where can we find both of you on the internet? Where should we track you all down?
So you can find me. I am active on social media. I'm at the Anti-Diet Plan, most active on Instagram, but you can find me on all the outlets. And I also am on the web. My website is drconason.com. I have a online mindful eating program. You can find information about that at theantidietplan.com.
And you can find me at Alison Gerber. My name has a funny spelling, so it's Alyson and Gerber, just like the baby food. So it's at Alison Gerber, and I'm very active on Instagram, Twitter, and my website is my name, AlisonGerber.com. You can find all the information about my books there.
Terrific. Thank you all so much. You can find us at tatteredcover.com, where we have more virtual events. This YouTube will be available for the public in a few days, so you can share it and spread the word for these two amazing books and authors. So thank you all for a great evening. Thank you two so much. Again, super important conversation. So I'm glad we had it tonight with Tattered Cover. So thank you again so much.
Thank you for having us.